It's the Studebaker. Yeah, the one with the little doggy in the window that goes...
For over 7 decades, Carol Burnett wasn't just a comedian. She was a force of nature, breaking barriers and rewriting what was possible for women in entertainment. But behind the sketches and standing ovations was a life filled with pain, resilience, and unbelievable moments of kindness and courage. What drove America's funniest woman to tears, and how did she turn tragedy into timeless art?
I'm so relieved we had this little talk, and it's so nice to know that you really care. Well, I'm interested in all my pupils.
Carol Burnett was born on April 26, 1933, in San Antonio, Texas. Her early years were shaped by hardship. Both of her parents struggled with alcoholism, which made it difficult for them to provide a stable home. Her father worked in a movie theater, but he couldn't keep jobs for long. Her mother, equally dependent on alcohol, was emotionally unavailable. These challenges eventually led to both parents dying from alcohol illnesses. By the time Carol was a toddler, she had already experienced neglect. The people meant to care for her simply couldn't. That early sense of abandonment left a deep impression on her. Eventually, her maternal grandmother, Mabel White, stepped in to raise her. In 1940, Carol and her grandmother moved to Hollywood, hoping for a better life. But the reality was anything but glamorous. They moved into a small, run-down boarding house, filled with people also trying to get by, some dealing with addiction, others with mental illness. Most were just trying to survive. Carol and her grandmother lived in a single room, surviving on just $20.00 a week. It wasn't much, but for Carol, it was the first time she felt safe and truly loved. Her grandmother offered something Carol hadn't known before, a sense of stability. There wasn't much money for food, and luxuries were out of the question. But even in those cramped conditions, Carol found ways to escape the harshness of her reality. One of those escapes came in the form of an imaginary twin sister. She invented a character named Karen, who was everything Carol wasn't: confident, beautiful, and carefree. She committed to the role so completely that other tenants in the boarding house believed Karen was real. Carol would run up the fire escape, change her outfit, redo her hair, and reappear as Karen. Minutes later, she'd return as herself. It may have been play acting, but it also showed her early flair for performance and how much people around her needed something joyful to believe in. Another consistent escape from their daily struggles came every Saturday. Carol and her grandmother would save up just enough to see a film together. 2 tickets cost 25 cents, which was more than 10% of their weekly income. It was a luxury they couldn't really afford, but one they prioritized nonetheless. For a couple of hours, the theater transported Carol into a world where everything sparkled. The people on screen laughed, loved, danced, and seemed to live without worry. But when the credits rolled, reality came rushing back. They didn't even have toilet paper at home, so Carol and her grandmother would quietly take some from the theater bathroom. They weren't stealing for the sake of it. They simply didn't have another option. Carol was still a child, but she understood what it meant to want more than just food. She wanted a better life. One day, during a film featuring Johnny Weissmuller, the actor famous for playing Tarzan, something unexpected happened. Carol heard the famous Tarzan yell echo through the cinema and became obsessed. She started mimicking it at home, studying the pitch, timing, and rhythm. Without realizing it, she was training her voice and building the kind of breath control professional singers aim for. It was all a game to her at the time, but it would later become a trademark feature in her live performances. As Carol grew up, she began to focus on journalism. It was her dream to become a writer, partly influenced by her mother, who once wanted to pursue a writing career herself. When Carol finished high school, she set her sights on attending UCLA, but tuition costs quickly presented a major obstacle. She didn't even have the $50.00 needed to register, which is roughly equivalent to $600.00 today. For most people in her position, that might have been the end of the story, but then something unusual happened. A stranger offered to pay her tuition. To this day, Carol never discovered who that person was. There were no conditions, just an envelope with enough money to enroll at UCLA. The gesture completely changed the trajectory of her life. At university, Carol started out as a journalism major, but one elective theatre class shifted everything. Something clicked during that course. She felt alive, confident, and connected in a way she never had before. Performing on stage gave her a new sense of purpose. Her professors saw it too and encouraged her to take acting more seriously. She had the ability to make people laugh, sing, and act, all within a single performance. That kind of range stood out. Carol changed her major from journalism to theatre. It was a risk, but she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was chasing something bigger. By the end of her freshman year, Carol was named the most promising newcomer in UCLA's theatre program. The recognition gave her a boost of confidence. It also led to better roles in school plays and caught the attention of mentors who believed in her talent. That moment helped her move beyond simply being a poor girl from a troubled home. It validated her dream and helped her realize that she had something unique to offer. Then, in 1954, while still at university and working part-time as an usherette for 65 cents an hour, Carol's life took another surprising turn. She was attending a party in San Diego, not to celebrate, but to collect leftover food to bring home to her grandmother. At that party, she met a well-dressed man who wasn't involved in show business. He was a shipbuilder and a millionaire. Carol shared her dream of moving to New York to work on Broadway, but explained that she didn't even have the money to cover tuition at UCLA, let alone fund a cross-country move. The man offered her and her boyfriend at the time, Don Soroyan, $1,000, 0 cents each, enough to make the move. But he gave them 3 rules: never reveal his name, only use the money to get to New York, and, if they ever became successful, they had to help others in return. Carol stuck to those rules. She and Don left UCLA and traveled to New York with the money. At the time, Carol had never been farther east than Texas, but she wasn't afraid. In her own words, "I didn't know enough to be scared." They checked into a modest hotel, but the funds quickly began to run out. At one point, Carol made a collect call to her family, crying and asking whether she should come home. Then she heard a weather report about a hurricane called Carol moving up the coast. It felt like a sign, and she stayed. Soon after, she found a spot at the Rehearsal Club, a shared boarding house for young women in the performing arts. For $18.00 a week, she got a cot in a crowded room and access to a single bathroom. It wasn't comfortable, but compared to the couch she used to sleep on, it felt like paradise. Carol worked night shifts as a hat check girl and auditioned during the day. It was hard, unpredictable work, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter. She was finally in the right place, with a small support system and a big dream that no longer felt impossible. That period of her life, marked by poverty, persistence, and surprising acts of generosity, formed the foundation for everything she would go on to achieve. It wasn't easy, but it was real. And most importantly, it gave Carol Burnett the tools she needed to survive the years ahead. After arriving in New York in the mid-1000, 950s with $1,000, 0 cents from an anonymous benefactor, Carol Burnett began carving out a space for herself in the world of live performance. She moved into the Rehearsal Club, a boarding house for aspiring actresses, and balanced her time between working as a hat check girl at night and auditioning during the day. The environment was competitive but energizing. Carol wasn't deterred by the long odds. She saw every small opportunity as a step forward. In March 1955, she and the other residents of the Rehearsal Club put on a small show called the Rehearsal Club Review. They invited casting agents, directors, and producers in hopes that someone would take notice. Some big names attended, including the legendary Marlene Dietrich. That night marked the beginning of Carol's professional visibility. One of her first breakout moments came in the form of a comedy sketch that shouldn't have worked on paper. A love song parody about John Foster Dulles, the then Secretary of State. It was absurd, intentionally over the top, and written by Ken Welch. But Carol delivered it so earnestly and with such impeccable comedic timing that it became her signature act. The bit got her noticed and led to television invitations. In 1957, she appeared on The Jack Paar Show, and not long after that, she performed on The Ed Sullivan Show. Her appearance on Sullivan's stage on January 6th of that year was a major turning point. She was nervous, unsure of how her unconventional act would be received by a national audience, but by the end of her set, the crowd was laughing and applauding. Her return to the show that August, this time performing the Dulles song and a parody of Puppy Love, solidified her presence in the comedy scene. These television spots opened doors that had once seemed closed to someone from her background. Still, nothing happened overnight. Carol continued to accept small roles, one of which was on The Paul Winchell Show, where she played the girlfriend of a ventriloquist's dummy. From there, she was cast alongside Buddy Hackett in a show called Stanley, which ran briefly from 1956 to 1957. The exposure was useful, but the roles were often limited in scope. In 1959, Carol landed her first major theatrical role that changed the direction of her career. She was cast as the lead in Once Upon a Mattress, a musical that was initially staged off-Broadway. She played Princess Winifred, a loud and unconventional royal from the marshlands. The character defied typical fairy tale tropes, and so did Carol's performance. It was fresh, funny, and unpretentious. Audiences loved it, and soon the show moved to Broadway. The production's critical response was mixed, but the public's enthusiasm kept it going. Carol's portrayal earned her a Tony Award nomination for Best Performance by a Leading Actress in a Musical. That same year, 5 years after the anonymous man helped fund her trip to New York, Carol and her boyfriend Don Soroyan repaid the $2,000 0 loan in full. They never heard from the man again, and he remained anonymous for the rest of his life. But Carol credited him with changing the course of hers. Once Upon a Mattress continued its Broadway run until 1960, and Carol's role was seen as central to its success. When she left the production, it folded shortly after, unable to continue without her. The fact that it closed just 1 week after her departure showed how much she had carried the show. It was a quiet but undeniable confirmation of her rising star. Her next big step came in the form of a television variety series. In 1959, Carol joined The Gary Moore Show as a regular cast member. It was a sketch comedy and variety program, and it gave her the chance to fully explore her range as a performer. She played various recurring characters and developed her comedic timing in front of a national audience. One of her most beloved characters during this time was a cleaning lady, often disheveled and wearing a mop cap, who would eventually become an iconic figure in her later work. Carol stayed on The Gary Moore Show until 1962, and during that time, she won her first Emmy Award for Outstanding Performance in a Variety or Musical Program. More than just a platform, the show was a learning ground. Gary Moore, known for his relaxed style and warm presence, ran a tight yet flexible ship. He encouraged improvisation, and his informal Q&A sessions with the studio audience inspired Carol's later interactions with viewers on her own show. She told Carol Shotblotter, "Takes him very well, knows who I am, can trust me to do whatever has to be done." The show also introduced Carol to fellow performers who would shape her future in comedy. Don Knotts and Jonathan Winters were just a couple of the talents who came through the program. The environment was competitive, but also collaborative, and it gave Carol the confidence to try new characters, voices, and formats. This period was essential in helping her develop the structure that would later define The Carol Burnett Show. In 1962, another significant moment occurred. Carol was offered the chance to perform in a television special with British singer and actress Julie Andrews. Initially, CBS executives were hesitant. Julie wasn't yet a household name in the United States. and Carol already had weekly TV exposure, the network doubted that the public would be interested in seeing more of her. But fate intervened in an unusual way. After a CBS promo event, Carol had trouble hailing a taxi. She joked to executives that maybe a truck would stop and pick her up instead. Moments later, a truck actually pulled over and offered her a ride. The executives took the bizarre coincidence as a sign and approved the show. That special, Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall, aired in 1962 and became a major success. It won 3 awards, including an Emmy, and was praised for its chemistry, comedy, and musical numbers. Columbia Records even released a soundtrack from the show, which climbed to number 85 on the US charts. The program helped launch Julie Andrews into American stardom and further solidified Carol's status as a multifaceted performer. Although these accomplishments were significant, nothing compared to what came next. On September 11, 1967, The Carol Burnett Show premiered on CBS. It was a full-fledged variety show built around Carol's strengths in sketch comedy, music, and improvisation. The format wasn't new, but having a woman lead such a high-profile show was. It broke barriers at a time when television, especially late night and comedy, was largely dominated by men. The program quickly gained popularity. It featured a blend of comedic sketches, musical performances, and audience interaction. Each week, millions of viewers tuned in to see Carol and her ensemble cast, which included Harvey Korman, Vicki Lawrence, Tim Conway, and later Dick Van Dyke. The show's success wasn't just about ratings. It changed how variety television was structured and who was allowed to lead it. What stood out most was the consistency. Regardless of the time slot or competing programs, The Carol Burnett Show remained a staple for viewers. It ran for 11 seasons and was watched by an estimated 30 million people every week at its peak. Few shows, then or now, have matched that kind of impact. The performances weren't just funny. They were often heartfelt and always grounded in character-driven humor. During its 11-year run, the show won 25 Primetime Emmy Awards, not just for comedy, but for writing, choreography, and variety performance. Carol herself won several of them, as did her co-stars Harvey Korman and Tim Conway. The show also earned 3 People's Choice Awards and 2 Golden Globes for Carol in the final 2 years of the series. It wasn't just about personal accolades. The show's influence helped shape future sketch comedy, paving the way for programs like Saturday Night Live and In Living Color. It showed that variety television could be led by someone who didn't fit the usual mold, and that a woman could helm a hit series with both heart and humor. For Carol Burnett, these years marked the height of her influence, but also the beginning of deeper personal and creative challenges that would soon follow. Despite the show's success and wide acclaim, the experience behind the scenes was not always smooth. By the 7th season of The Carol Burnett Show, tension started to show. One of the most dramatic moments involved Harvey Korman, a central figure in the show's ensemble. He had been a key comedic partner for Carol, but during rehearsals for an episode featuring singer Petula Clark and comedian Tim Conway, he became difficult to work with. Korman was irritable and dismissive, a shift in mood that didn't go unnoticed. Normally, Carol chose not to confront cast tensions directly, but this time she made an exception. After the Friday night taping, she took Korman aside and asked what was going on. His response was blunt. He said he was unhappy working on the show. After their conversation, he slammed the dressing room door in her face. That weekend, Carol made a difficult decision. She called Korman's agent and fired him from the program. However, over the weekend, Korman reconsidered and asked for another chance. Carol agreed on one condition. She told him that on Monday morning, she wanted to see him arrive at CBS skipping and whistling. When Monday came, Korman did exactly that. Carol found it funny enough to order a custom plaque for his dressing room door that read, Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky. Korman remained with the show until season 10. While Korman's presence was important, it was Tim Conway who became the unpredictable wild card of the series. Unlike other performers, Conway made a habit of saving his best material for the live tapings rather than rehearsals. He believed comedy needed to feel fresh, even for his co-stars, and refused to fully reveal his plans until the cameras were rolling. This unpredictability often left the rest of the cast struggling to stay in character, but it also contributed to some of the show's most unforgettable moments. One of the most famous examples of this came during the Family sketch series, when Conway told a completely improvised and drawn-out story about a circus elephant. As he spun the tale, filled with odd details and nonsensical logic, including Carol, Vicki Lawrence, and guest star Dick Van Dyke, found it nearly impossible to keep straight faces. Conway continued without breaking, while everyone else was visibly trying not to laugh. Eventually, even Vicki Lawrence cracked and delivered an off-the-cuff line that stunned the room. Conway, usually the one making others laugh, broke character and doubled over in hysterics. The audience erupted. That moment wasn't scripted or planned. It was raw, spontaneous, and became part of the show's legacy. Although the Carol Burnett show was known for comedy, one of its most impactful moments came from a completely serious performance. In 1977, a sketch from the recurring segment The Family took a dramatically different turn. Usually centered around dysfunction and dark humor, the sketch this time focused on Eunice Higgins, Carol's character, in a deeply emotional situation. The sketch was called The Gong Show and featured Eunice trying out for a local talent show, hoping that her singing would finally lead to fame. However, instead of being celebrated, she was mocked by the judges. One of the judges was played by real-life game show host Alan Ludden. This time, there were no exaggerated accents or slapstick movements. Carol played Eunice with restraint and raw emotion. By the end of the sketch, the crew on set was in tears. When it aired, audiences were stunned. The closing shot lingered on Eunice's tear-streaked face, with no music and no jokes, just silence. Critics praised the scene for its depth and bravery. Carol, however, never watched it again. In later interviews, she explained that the pain Eunice felt hit too close to home. It reminded her of her own past, of dreaming big and being dismissed. She called the sketch too real. The scene eventually led to a spin-off TV movie in 1982 titled Eunice, and later to a sitcom called Mama's Family. Although Carol left the spin-off after disagreements over creative direction, the original sketch remained a defining moment in her career. While Carol was winning Emmys and accolades on screen, her personal life was far more complicated. Her marriage to Don Saroyan had already ended in the early 1960s, and although her second marriage to television producer Joe Hamilton was more stable for a time, cracks eventually began to show. Joe had produced many of Carol's specials and her Carnegie Hall concert with Julie Andrews, and together they had 3 daughters, Carrie, Jodie, and Erin. They also experienced a miscarriage in 1965. With Joe's 8 children from his previous marriage, their blended family was large and often chaotic. One of the most public challenges Carol faced during this time was her battle against the tabloid press. In 1976, the National Enquirer published a story claiming Carol had been drunk and disorderly in a restaurant, making a scene near then-Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. The accusation was not only false but hit a personal nerve. Carol had grown up in a household destroyed by alcoholism, and she had long spoken out about the damage it caused. She decided to sue for defamation, seeking $1,600,000, 0 cents, in damages. The legal battle lasted 5 years and revealed how loosely the tabloid operated. A paid informant had told the magazine that Carol had not been drunk, but they ran the story anyway. Although the case was eventually settled for about $200,000, 0 cents, after appeals, Carol considered it a victory. It wasn't about the money. It was about defending her name and drawing a line in the sand. The lawsuit set an early precedent for celebrities fighting back against false press and changed the way tabloids handled celebrity coverage. However, the most painful struggle Carol faced was closer to home. In the late 1970s, her eldest daughter, Carrie Hamilton, began battling drug addiction. At just 13 years old, Carrie was using cocaine, marijuana, mushrooms, and prescription pills. In later interviews, Carrie admitted that part of her motivation was to break free from her mother's shadow. Being known as Carol Burnett's daughter came with pressure she wasn't ready to handle. Carol did everything she could to help her daughter. She sent her to rehab facilities across the country. At one point, Carrie ran away from a Texas treatment center, prompting Carol to fear she might lose her daughter completely. When Carrie finally got sober at 17, their relationship was strained. Carol once said that she had to love her daughter enough to let her hate her. It took over a year before they reconciled, but when they did, their bond grew stronger than ever. Carrie went on to star in the television series Fame, showing that she had her own talent. She later co-wrote a play with her mother titled Hollywood Arms, based on Carol's life story. The two collaborated on various projects and shared a deep emotional connection. Tragically, in 2002, Carrie died from pneumonia, linked to lung cancer that had spread to her brain. She was just 38 years old. Hollywood Arms opened on stage shortly after her death. Carol attended the premiere and said she owed it to Carrie to see it through. By that time, Carol's second marriage had already ended. She and Joe Hamilton divorced in 1984, worn down by the stress of parenting, career demands, and personal struggles. After the split, Carol and Joe agreed to send their two youngest daughters to live in Hawaii for a time, hoping to shield them from the tension at home. Despite the divorce, Joe remained close to the family until his death from cancer in 1991. In the late 1990s, Carol found companionship again. While performing in Long Beach, she met Brian Miller, a musician 23 years younger than her. Their age difference raised eyebrows, but Carol didn't care. They married in 2001. Just 2 months later, Carrie died. Brian helped Carol through that devastating loss and encouraged her to finish Hollywood Arms. The couple has remained together since, navigating life's ups and downs with quiet resilience. Carol's journey, both public and private, was far from smooth. Behind the laughter was a woman who carried the weight of personal tragedy, heartbreak, and extraordinary resilience. These experiences shaped her not just as a performer, but as a human being. Someone deeply familiar with both joy and pain, and someone who never let either define her entirely. Even after decades in the spotlight, Carol Burnett continued to work in film, television, and theatre with a level of energy and adaptability that most performers would struggle to maintain. By the time she reached her late 70s, she had already left an undeniable mark on the entertainment industry. Still, her career was far from over. In her later years, Burnett's acting range surprised many. She returned to television in guest roles that were far removed from the sketch characters that had made her famous. One such appearance was in the hit 1990 sitcom, Mad About You. The show starred Paul Reiser and Helen Hunt as a married couple navigating modern life in New York. Burnett played Teresa, a recurring character whose quiet humor and sharp observations added emotional depth to the show. Her performance earned her an Emmy Award in 1997 for Outstanding Guest Actress in a Comedy Series. It was a reminder that she was more than a variety show performer. She could step into contemporary roles and deliver memorable performances without relying on physical comedy or exaggerated characters. She went on to win the American Comedy Award for the same role 2 years in a row, proving her versatility once again. In the 2000s, Burnett transitioned into voice work, introducing her unique charm to a new generation of audiences through animated films. Her voice carried warmth, clarity, and personality, traits that resonated with children and adults alike. One of her biggest successes in this space came in 2008 when she voiced a character in Horton Hears a Who, a CGI adaptation of the Dr. Seuss classic. The film featured an all-star cast including Jim Carrey and Steve Carell, and was a commercial hit, grossing nearly $300 million, 0 cents, worldwide. Years earlier, she had also voiced Mrs. Hammerbotham in The Trumpet of the Swan, working alongside Reese Witherspoon and Jason Alexander. These roles allowed Burnett to continue reaching audiences Even those unfamiliar with her television legacy, her ability to connect through voice alone reflected both her talent and her adaptability. Despite her growing presence in animation and sitcom guest roles, the stage remained an important part of her career. In 1999, she returned to Broadway after nearly 3 decades, starring in Putting It Together, a musical revue featuring the songs of Stephen Sondheim. The show opened at the Ethel Barrymore Theatre in New York and ran for more than 100 performances. Burnett played the role of the wife, joining a cast that included theatre veterans like George Hearn and John Barrowman. Performing live again gave her a sense of homecoming. Even when things didn't go according to plan, she used the moments to her advantage. During one performance, her skirt fell unexpectedly, and she turned it into a spontaneous gag, much to the delight of the audience. The show was later recorded and broadcast, capturing her enduring stage presence and quick improvisational skills. Critics had mixed opinions about the show overall, but Burnett's individual performance was widely praised. In 2022, Burnett appeared in a more serious role that would introduce her to yet another new audience. She played the character of Marion in the final season of Better Call Saul, a highly acclaimed spin-off of Breaking Bad. Her character was a kind but perceptive elderly woman who gradually uncovered the truth about the main character, Saul Goodman. In one of the season's most suspenseful scenes, Burnett's character used an old search engine to look into Saul's background, ultimately discovering who he really was. The moment she confronted him became one of the show's most intense sequences. Her quiet delivery and sharp timing added significant weight to the scene. The show's co-creator Vince Gilligan later said it felt strange to write a moment where the audience was supposed to believe Saul might harm someone, played by Carol Burnett. Still, the scene worked precisely because Burnett brought such gravitas to the role. In 2024, Burnett took on a new challenge in the Apple TV series Palm Royale. She played Norma Delacour, a wealthy and powerful woman who spends much of the series in a coma. However, when she eventually regains consciousness, Burnett is required to deliver scenes involving physical comedy and nonsensical speech patterns that mimicked someone recovering from a neurological episode. Remarkably, Burnett improvised most of the gibberish herself. At 91 years old, her ability to take creative risks and perform convincingly in such a complex role earned her widespread praise. The show received 11 Emmy nominations, including a historic one for Burnett. She became the oldest woman ever nominated in the supporting actress in a comedy series category. Even in a cast that included names like Kristen Wiig, Ricky Martin, and Laura Dern, Burnett's performance stood out. Away from the screen, Burnett continued to deal with significant family challenges. In 2020, she and her husband Brian Miller were granted legal guardianship of their grandson Dylan. Dylan's mother, Burnett's daughter Erin, had been battling addiction for years. Court documents revealed that Erin had been in and out of treatment facilities more than 8 times and had spent close to 240 days in institutional care. The tipping point came when Erin's home environment was deemed unsafe and she made suicidal threats to her children. The court granted temporary custody to Burnett and Miller in August 2020. This was not the first time Burnett had stepped in to protect a family member, but it was one of the most personal and public. She had always said that family came first, and this decision demonstrated that commitment yet again. Through it all, Carol Burnett maintained a relatively low public profile, while still engaging with fans and occasionally making public appearances. She released books, gave interviews, and took part in retrospectives about her career. In 2023, to celebrate her 90th birthday, NBC aired a television special titled Carol Burnett, 90 Years of Laughter Plus Love. The special featured tributes from colleagues and friends across generations and highlighted moments from her extensive career. Burnett was present at the event, seated beside her husband, smiling as clips from her show and personal life played on the big screen. Over the years, Burnett has received numerous honors for her contributions to entertainment. In 2005, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. In 2019, the Golden Globes created a special award in her name, the Carol Burnett Award for Achievement in Television, and she was its first recipient. The award recognized her outstanding contribution to the television industry over several decades, in addition to her 6 Emmy wins and 25 nominations. She also holds a Peabody Award, a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and the Kennedy Center honors. Despite all the accolades and recognition, Burnett has often said that the greatest joy of her career was making people laugh. Her legacy lies not only in the awards or the groundbreaking nature of her show, but in the simple connection she forged with audiences. Her comedy was inclusive, joyful, and clever. She respected her viewers enough not to talk down to them and trusted that they would understand the humor, even when it became deeply personal. Carol Burnett's life is a reflection of perseverance, creativity, and quiet strength. She rose from poverty in a boarding house to become one of the most respected figures in American entertainment. Her career has spanned every major shift in the television industry, from the golden age of variety shows to modern streaming dramas. At each stage, she adapted, grew, and left a lasting impression. Even now, her influence can be felt in the work of countless performers who followed her. Comedians like Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, and Maya Rudolph have all cited Burnett as an inspiration. Her impact is not only visible in their work, but in the doors she helped open for women in comedy, television, and beyond. Carol Burnett's story isn't just about success, it's about resilience, reinvention, and staying true to yourself, even when the world expects otherwise. From her earliest performances to her most recent roles, she has shown that talent may open doors, but heart is what keeps them open.